Hello and welcome to Veteran for God Ministry. I hope that you're having a wonderful day today. Today is our fourth episode in the mini-series, The Minimal Facts Approach to the Resurrection of Jesus. I hope that you have enjoyed the last three episodes, and I hope that you will enjoy this one also. So let's get right into it. The first fact is James, a former skeptic and the brother of Jesus, was converted when he believed he saw the risen Jesus. James, the skeptical brother. Mark chapter 3, verse 21 says, when his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said he is out of his mind. John chapter 7, verse 5 says, for even his own brother did not believe in him. We know that James is the brother of Jesus, and he was skeptical of him. James converts. 1 Corinthians 15, chapter 15, verse 7 says, then he appeared to James. This passage is part of the Creed. Acts chapter 1, verse 14 says, they all joined together constantly in prayer, along with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and with his brothers. Acts chapter 12, verse 17b says, tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this. Galatians chapter 2, verse 9 says, James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed pillars. James chapter 1, verse 1 says, James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, before I mention the last point on this, the James that is discussed in each of these passages is James, the brother of Jesus. Now, James, the disciple, has already been killed at this point for, 1 Corinthians, Acts chapter 12, Galatians, and of course, James, the book of James is written by James, the brother of Jesus. Now, for the last point, Jewish historian Josephus states, Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. Now, this is a non-Christian ancient historian source discussing about the death of James being stoned. Now, at this point, when it comes to James and the hallucination theory, as I mentioned in the last video, that James and Paul are going to be the biggest problem for the hallucination theory. As we know that James was skeptical of Jesus. They thought he was crazy. They did not believe in him. And James, was one of them brothers who was a part of that. He was a unbeliever. And, when Jesus died, I would say he would have had no point of hallucinating Jesus. Again, going back to Mark, they thought he was crazy. I would even assume that, James believed that Jesus brought this unwanted attention upon, his brother James. So, throwing out an example, James could have been teased that his brother was crazy, or, you're that brother of this crazy guy named Jesus who thinks he's the Son of God and all this stuff. So he would have brought this unwanted attention on James. And, when Jesus' death, James would have been sorrowed because he was still his brother. But when it came to being, like the disciples of Jesus, I don't believe that he was to that point to where he was, bereaved, lost hope. They were in hiding from the Jews, because they feared him. James, he probably mourned Jesus, probably for that day. And that's just a suggestion. It doesn't tell us. But, after that, he would have had no point to want to hallucinate Jesus. This attention is, off of him now and everything else. So when it comes to what we learned from Paul, that he appeared to James, a great point that I would bring out is that James grew up with Jesus before he started on his earthly ministry. So for 30 years, he would have been, with Jesus and stuff like that. They were still brothers. So he would have known who Jesus was and everything else. So When he appeared to Jesus, he knows that he was dead. And what he is looking at is his brother who is supposed to be dead. Again, James wouldn't have a hallucination. He's just one of them individuals who, in his mind, just wouldn't want to hallucinate that. So when Jesus appeared to James, James knows that Jesus was dead, but now he's seeing him. So he's probably, what in the world is going on? And I would even go back to what Jesus tells Thomas, touch my side and everything. I think at this point, James would have, kind of felt, is this real? Is this not? And just like to Thomas, I believe that, Jesus would have showed James, the nail marks in his wrist and his feet and, the spear through the side. So again, James is just one of them individuals who just would not have a reason to want to hallucinate this. This is, attention brought off of him that he does not want. It's done and gone with. Yes, he misses his brother, but that's about it. Next is the fact of Saul, which we know as Paul of Tarsus, a persecutor of the church and skeptic, was converted after he believed he saw the risen Jesus. Saul of Tarsus, this is before he becomes converted. We first see Paul in Acts chapter 7, verse 58. Then they cast him out of the city and stoned him, talking about Stephen. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. Acts chapter 8, verses 1 and 3 says, and Saul approved of his execution. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged them off, men and women, and committed them to prison. Acts chapter 9, verse 1 through 2 says, meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the disciples. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Galatians 1, chapter 1, verse 13 through 14, which is from Paul himself, stating, for you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how intensely I persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. Again, this is a speech from Paul in Acts chapter 22, verse 3 through 5. I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in the city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into the prison. As the high priest and all of the council can themselves testify, I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus and went there to bring those people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. Now, Paul, the apostle, this is after Paul becomes converted. Acts chapter 9, verse 3 through 9 says, as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? Saul asked. I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. The men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could not see nothing. So he led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Acts chapter 22, verse 6 through 8 says, about noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. And this is Paul talking. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. And again, the creed from 1 Corinthians 15, verse 8. And last of all, he appeared to me, and this is Paul talking about himself, as to one abnormally born. So before I mention the conclusion of all together, I'll go back to Paul. Now, Paul and the hallucination theory, I would see as water and oil. It just does not mix. Paul's very clear of who he was. He wanted the church to be destroyed. He got letters to go to Damascus, and I believe, if he continued on this, he would have went to different areas to arrest those who followed Jesus, to bring back to Jerusalem to be jailed and be punished. And again, Paul's just one of these individuals who would not have a reason to even want to hallucinate Jesus. And to kind of throw this out that, that Paul is being truthful when he states that Jesus appeared to him, that this account is reliable, and I believe that it actually happened, is look back at the life of Paul as he was Saul. He was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He was highly trained. I mean, he mentions his teacher who he trained under. He would have been well respected by other Pharisees and people around him in Jerusalem. They would have feared him. They would have respected him. Paul had a great life. So what would be the point for Paul to go and want to hallucinate someone that he wants to be dead forever, wants nothing to do with it, and anyone who follows him, he wants them gone. He wants to destroy them. But yet Paul even states that on the road to Damascus, he saw the risen Jesus. And what's more credible is, again, looking back at the life of Paul, we know that that Paul is told that he's going to suffer. And for, again, looking at it, Paul apparently seeing hallucinations is going to get, going to face suffering. It doesn't add up all that good, because again, Paul not going to be that person who hallucinates Jesus. He's at the very bottom of the totem pole who's going to, even do that. But he believes that he saw the risen Jesus and is okay with suffering. We know that Paul faces, stoning, thrown out of city, thrown out of the temples and stuff, snake bit, shipwrecked, and, goes to Rome, the most terrible place for him to go as a Christian to try to share the gospel. And of course, he dies there. But at the end of it, he taught, believed, and died what he believed was the risen Jesus who appeared to him on the road to Damascus and changed his life. Again, looking back at it, and I'll talk about James and Paul together now. In my conclusion, I believe that James and Paul were two of the most unlikely characters who would hallucinate Jesus. Again, James getting that attention off of him, so be it. Yes, that's my brother. Okay, but am I going to hallucinate him? No. But yet James even comes clear that he is a servant of the Lord. How do you go from being skeptical of your brother but serving him and calling him Lord? There had to be something great, which was Jesus appearing to him, not as a hallucination, but as a physical person to him. And again, for Paul clearly states, and we can look through all of Paul's letters, Paul says that he is a bondservant of the Lord. And this is talking about Jesus. You do not go from wanting to kill everyone who follows this person to calling him Lord, facing all these sufferings, and is willing to go to one of the most dangerous places, which is Rome, to share the gospel with people and die from it. So again, Paul and James are just two of those individuals who are the least likely to want to hallucinate or just even would hallucinate Jesus. So I hope that, from this, that you hold, this kind of same view. If you don't, I would applaud you to go and look into more sources on this. For Paul and James, go through some of the early church fathers' writings, Clement of Alexandria and others. Look through what they state about Paul and James. Again, we know that Paul and James both died being skeptics before, but died being believers, believing that they saw the risen Jesus. Again, I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope that there's some things that you learned. Again, there's sources out there that are going to explain this better than I am. I'm just trying to break it down to where hopefully at your level and at my level, that we can both understand it. And I hope that this is something that you can use in your daily life. Again, thank you. Also, here are the sources. Uh, Flavius Josephus, he mentions as a Jewish historian, he is a Jewish ancient historian who needed no tie to Christianity, didn't want no part of it, but yet he mentions uh, James and Jesus. And I would probably also, if I look through it, or if you want to as well, probably mentions Paul and other people. Again, I would applaud you to look more into this if this is something that's interesting to you, or if you believe that I didn't go in depth all that much into it. So I applaud you to do the research, and I hope this is something that you've liked and that you can use daily in your life. Again, thank you, and I will see you next time.